Amelia Cross adjusted the cascade of lilies in her arms, the delicate fragrance rising to meet the scent of old wood and velvet that saturated the Royal Conservatory's grand hall. Her linen apron, smudged with pollen, clung awkwardly to her frame as she weaved through the labyrinth of champagne towers and golden candelabras. Overhead, the chandeliers, massive galaxies of glass, bathed the room in a shimmering glow, casting her in the soft, indifferent light of a servant. No one noticed the florist. They never did. The gala buzzed around her, a hive of tailored suits and silk gowns, every conversation a low hum of influence and self-importance. In the distance, the grand stage loomed, its polished wooden floors gleaming under the weight of expectation. The evening's headliner, virtuoso violinist Benedict Hale, was set to perform Bach's Chaconne, a masterpiece so demanding it was whispered only a true genius dared attempt it live. Amelia stole a glance at the Steinway nestled to the side, the violin resting atop a velvet pedestal, like an offering to gods made of wealth and legacy. Somewhere deep within her chest, a muscle long dormant twitched, a memory flickering and retreating like a moth from flame. A shriek cut through the air. Heads turned as Evelyn Drake, the gala's iron-willed director, stormed from backstage, her sequined gown rippling like a storm cloud. Behind her, a young assistant stumbled breathlessly, tablet clutched to his chest. "Benedict's been in an accident," the boy gasped. "He won't make it. Car crash on the M4. Nothing fatal, but..." A wave of panic spread, sharp and cold. "No backup?" Evelyn's voice cracked the gala's polished composure. "No understudy?" The assistant shook his head, eyes wide. The donors, ancient, glittering, omnipotent, began to murmur, their champagne flutes frozen mid-air. "This night cannot fail," Evelyn hissed, her manicured hand curling into a fist. "Find someone, anyone, we cannot afford a scandal." A cruel snicker broke the tension. From near the dessert table, a cluster of conservatory students huddled, their tuxedos sharp, their smiles sharper. Ethan Marlowe, a violin prodigy as arrogant as he was talented, pointed toward Amelia. "What about the flower girl?" he called, loud enough for the room to hear. Giggles erupted like firecrackers. Evelyn's head snapped toward Amelia, her painted lips curling into a smile, not of kindness, but of opportunity. The laughter swelled, filling the gilded arches overhead. "Fitting?" a woman in emerald whispered, her pearls catching the light. Entertainment and cleaning all in one. Amelia froze, the lilies wilting slightly in her grasp. For a moment the ground tilted, the faces around her blending into a blur of contempt and amusement. She should have looked away. She should have fled, hidden behind the towering arrangements she'd spent hours crafting. Instead, she met Evelyn's gaze. Steady, quiet, unbroken. "You there?" Evelyn called, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "You play, don't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in mockery. Amelia's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the stems. "I do," she said, her voice low but clear. The students howled with glee. Phones materialized from clutches and jacket pockets, cameras already trained on her for what they believed would be the night's punchline. "Ethan's right," someone crowed. "Let's see her scrape out Twinkle, Twinkle." Evelyn gestured dramatically toward the stage, as if unveiling a joke too good to pass up. "Then impress us, florist," she said. Amelia crossed the marble floor, each step as heavy as an anchor and as inevitable as a sunrise. The laughter, the disdain, the blinding lights, they pressed against her, but she moved forward, toward the violin, toward the place she had once belonged. As her fingers brushed the worn neck of the instrument, the world, the wealth, the Whispers, the weight of years, receded. Only the music remained, and they had no idea what storm they had just invited. The world beneath the chandeliers shifted as Amelia took the stage. She could feel it, the crackling energy of an audience on the cusp of ridicule, the way the air turned sharper, hungrier. Her scuffed flats whispered against the gleaming wood, a quiet contrast to the brittle laughter rippling through the rows of velvet seats. Evelyn Drake stepped forward with the microphone, her smile a blade polished to brilliance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice dripping with performative sweetness. "Tonight, in an unexpected twist, we present Amelia Cross, floral artisan and, apparently, violinist." The crowd tittered. Phones rose like a mechanical forest, recording the spectacle before it began. Amelia stood beside the solitary chair and music stand set for Benedict, her linen apron still dusted with pollen, the cheap cotton clinging awkwardly under the searing spotlights. A low murmur buzzed through the gala, an orchestra of doubt, disdain, and gleeful expectation for failure. "What's next?" someone muttered near the front. "The kitchen staff giving us a concerto?" Another voice. "At least it'll be memorable." A woman with a platinum necklace too heavy for her thin neck leaned toward her husband, smirking. "She looks like she's about to faint. Poor thing." Amelia didn't faint. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for the violin resting on its velvet cradle. Not the pristine showcase piece intended for the headliner, but an old, worn instrument tucked unnoticed near the side. Its wood bore scratches like battle scars, the varnish dulled by years, yet it pulsed with a familiarity that steadied her hands. It was the kind of violin that belonged to someone who had played through storms, the kind that had once belonged to her father. Her fingers curved around the neck, brushing the tuning pegs with the reverence of a daughter greeting an old friend. The weight of it in her hands was different from the bouquets she carried daily, yet somehow heavier, more real. The crowd grew restless. "Play Hot Cross Buns!" Ethan Marlowe jeered from the student section, his voice loud and sharp. Laughter erupted in small, cruel bursts. Amelia tucked the violin under her chin. Her bow hovered, trembling almost imperceptibly. The first note would be the most dangerous. The first note would determine everything. In the balcony, a reporter adjusted, her camera already crafting headlines. "Royal Conservatory Gala derailed by staff stunt." In the front row, donors leaned back, crossing arms, their faces expectant, waiting for the inevitable disaster. The room smelled of lilies and mockery. Amelia closed her eyes. She did not hear their laughter anymore. She heard the creak of an old porch swing at dusk, where her father had first placed a violin into her small hands. She heard the sigh of the sea wind against the cliffs of Dover, where she had once played for no one but the stars. She heard the silence of the hospital room where she had played through her grief, long after the machines had fallen still. She was not the flower girl now. She was the daughter of music. The bow fell. The first note sang out, clear, rich, sorrowful, slicing through the laughter like a blade. It was not the shaky screech they expected. It was not the broken amateur sound they had so hungrily anticipated. It was Bach, ancient and unyielding. The opening chords of Chaconne poured from her violin, each note weighted with the years she had swallowed her music, each vibration a stitch, knitting her shattered pieces back together. The crowd stilled, phones that had been raised in mockery now lowered, hands frozen midair. Mouths hung open, caught between a laugh and something they didn't yet understand. It was not perfection, not yet. There was a rawness in her sound, a ragged edge to her bowing, born of years spent silent. But it was alive. It was real. And it demanded to be heard. In the wings, Evelyn's manicured hand tightened around her clipboard, her lips parting in disbelief. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the smirk fading from his face. Amelia did not see them. She did not need to. Her eyes remained closed, her world narrowed to the sweep of the bow and the thrum of the strings under her fingers. This was her reckoning, and it had only just begun. The first few notes of Bach's Chaconne floated over the audience like an incantation, raw and trembling but undeniable. Then came the shift, slow at first, a pulling in of breath, a tilting forward of bodies too proud a moment ago to acknowledge the stage. Silence bloomed, not the expectant hush of polite society. No, this was something deeper, a silence that pressed against the ribcage that whispered, "Listen, or be left behind." Amelia's bow traced the strings, her fingers dancing in practiced sorrow. She played without pageantry, without spectacle, her music stripped bare of anything except truth. And in that truth, the gala began to crumble. Gone was the florist with smudged apron and frayed flats. Standing in her place was a force, not polished, not rehearsed, but devastatingly real. In the front row, Sir Harold Wakefield, a patron, whose fortune funded half the conservatory's gilded facade, leaned forward, squinting as if trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he was seeing. "She plays like someone who's lived through it," he muttered, almost to himself. Beside him, Lady Marianne tucked her diamond bracelet under her sleeve, suddenly self-conscious. In the back rows, reporters lowered their cameras, lenses forgotten in trembling hands. The story they had come to capture, a disaster, a downfall, was evaporating before their eyes. There would be no ridicule tonight. Ethan Marlowe sat stiffly in the students' gallery, his earlier mockery curdling into something sour and cold in his gut. He had spent years climbing, clawing, believing that mastery came with polish, with perfection, with the right pedigree stitched into a name. But this, what Amelia poured into the hall, had no title, no pedigree. It had soul, and it raised every illusion he had ever clung to. On the stage, Amelia played as if the violin were not an instrument, but an extension of her own battered spirit. The rough spots in her technique did not diminish the performance. They sharpened it like salt in a wound. Each imperfect stroke was a testament to battles fought in silence, to grief worn like armor. The chandelier light caught in the sheen of her hair, loose strands clinging to her flushed cheeks. The bow trembled, then surged, drawing from the strings a cry so fierce, so heartbreakingly human, that it left the audience breathless. In the shadows backstage, Evelyn Drake watched, her clipboard forgotten, her face taut with something dangerously close to fear. She had wanted a spectacle. She had summoned a reckoning. Somewhere near the exit, a little girl in a frilly white dress clutched her mother's hand, whispering, "Mama, she's making the violin." Ski, the mother, a socialite in towering heels, said nothing. Her throat, tight with an ache she hadn't felt since childhood, refused to cooperate. As the chaconne unfurled, its themes dark, relentless, the room itself seemed to tilt on its axis. Those who had come to sip champagne and be seen now sat captive, woven into Amelia's music against their will. The notes rose higher, climbing toward a precipice. Every mockery etched into Amelia's memory, every cruel laugh, every dismissive glance, fueled the fire roaring through her fingertips. And yet there was no hatred in her playing. Only sorrow, only strength, Only the quiet, breathtaking defiance of someone who had long ago learned that the world does not bend for broken dreams. So you bend yourself into something unbreakable. The final phrase of the chaconne trembled. On the edge of release, poised like a bird before flight, Amelia opened her eyes, not to seek approval, not to claim vengeance, but to simply witness what she had created. A room full of kings and queens and critics, silenced not by power, but by truth. She drew the last note, soft as a benediction, and let it fall into the stillness. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The world, it seemed, had forgotten how to breathe. The final note dissolved into the rafters, leaving behind a silence so absolute it roared louder than applause ever could. Amelia lowered her violin slowly, the bow slipping from her fingers to dangle at her side. Her chest rose and fell, not with exhaustion, but with the quiet clarity of someone who had laid their soul bare and had not broken. For a moment longer, the audience remained suspended, caught between disbelief and awe. Then it happened. One pair of hands, hesitant, trembling, began to clap. It came from the back row, where an older man with a silver beard stood, tears unapologetically shining in his eyes. His palms met again and again, the sound growing bolder with each strike. Others followed, scattered at first, then faster, louder. A tide of standing bodies swept across the gala, velvet chairs creaking as people rose, not out of obligation but compulsion. The ovation broke like a dam. Amelia stood amidst it, unmoving. She didn't bask in their praise, she didn't preen or bow. She simply let it pass over her like a river, a current she neither sought nor resisted. In the student balcony, Ethan Marlowe sat frozen, his hands numb and empty. His violin, the instrument he had once brandished like a crown, felt suddenly heavy across his lap. He had mocked her, dismissed her, and now, faced with the raw truth of her brilliance, he felt exposed, small even. Down near the stage, Lady Marianne dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Beside her, her husband Sir Harold clapped harder than anyone, his cufflinks glinting beneath the chandeliers. For once the jewels did not outshine the room's truest light. Evelyn Drake gripped the side of the stage, her knuckles white. This wasn't the gala she had orchestrated. This wasn't the narrative she had curated. Amelia had stolen the night without permission, and without forgiveness. From the wings, a hush fell over the murmuring staff as they watched. Lucas, Evelyn's assistant, tucked his tablet against his chest, his earlier smirk wiped clean, albeit footage he had cued for social media, meant to humiliate Amelia, would never see the light of day. He knew better now. Tucked among the shadows, a few students who had jeered earlier exchanged uneasy glances. The woman they had called Flower Girl had summoned something they could not manufacture with all their training, all their polished competitions. Genius was supposed to come from the polished, the pedigreed, the proper. But tonight, genius had come from a woman in a wrinkled apron and scuffed shoes. As the ovation thundered, the doors at the rear of the hall swung open with a reverberating boom. Heads turned, a figure entered, tall, measured, and devastatingly composed. He wore a charcoal gray suit cut so perfectly it seemed to absorb the light, his silver hair swept back, his presence consuming the space without effort. Sebastian Vaughn, the renowned philanthropist. The elusive art patron whose single endorsement could elevate a career or end it. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Why is he here? He never attends galas. What does this mean? Sebastian moved toward the stage with the inevitability of a rising tide, his eyes locked on Amelia. Not with amusement, not with skepticism, but with a reverence no one could fake. Amelia met his gaze. She did not smile. She did not shrink. And in that silent exchange, the balance of power in the room shifted, permanently. The applause still thundered as Sebastian Vaughn mounted the steps to the stage, his polished shoes silent against the wood. He moved with the easy authority of a man who never needed to announce himself. The world simply rearranged around his presence. Amelia stood quietly, violin by her side, her linen apron a banner of quiet defiance against the storm of grandeur. Sebastian stopped before her, and for a breathless moment the entire Royal Conservatory held still. He extended his hand, not in charity, not in condescension, but in recognition. Amelia hesitated, the bow still dangling from her fingers like a forgotten sword. The eyes of the gala, once filled with disdain, now hungered for her next move. She placed her hand in his. It was a small gesture, yet in that touch the ground shifted. Sebastian turned toward the audience, his expression carved from iron and fire. "My friends," he said, his voice calm but carrying like a symphony. "You have just witnessed something tonight that no headline, no program, no carefully curated invitation could have ever promised you." A hush blanketed the room, thick and smothering. "This woman," he continued, nodding to Amelia, "is Amelia Cross, not a florist, not a joke, but a virtuoso, whose brilliance puts to shame every shallow standard we have let corrupt this house of art." Evelyn Drake flinched as if slapped. Sebastian's gaze swept the crowd, pinning donors, critics, students alike to their seats. "We pride ourselves," he said, "on nurturing talent, on honoring artistry. Yet tonight, when confronted with raw genius wrapped in humble cloth instead of diamonds, what did we offer?" No one spoke, no one dared. Sebastian's lips curled into something not quite a smile. Mockery, scorn, laughter. The words, though soft, landed like blows. Across the hall, hands once raised in applause lowered to laps, fingers twisting nervously. Amelia stood unmoving, the violin still at her side, her face a study in stillness. She did not bask in his defense. She did not need to. Sebastian turned back to her, his voice gentler now, but no less commanding. "Amelia Cross," he said, "deserves more than our belated applause. She deserves a stage that honors her." He reached into his jacket and produced a slim black envelope, its wax seal glinting under the chandeliers. "In 2 months' time," he announced, "Amelia will headline at the Royal Philharmonic Hall. Under my personal patronage." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Not an opening act, not a charity slot, a headliner. Ethan Marlowe's face drained of color, the violin slipping from his hands with a dull clatter. The critics who had come to sharpen their knives now scrambled for pens, desperate to salvage their reputations. Tears pricked the corners of Amelia's eyes, but she blinked them away, standing tall beneath the crashing tide of expectation. Sebastian stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Let them chase your light," he said. "You were never theirs to mock." With that, he turned back to the audience and spoke a final sentence that would burn into every article, every headline, every whispered conversation from that night forward. "Tonight, you did not discover Amelia Cross," he said. "You merely caught up to her." The applause reignited, but this time it was different. No longer the clattering noise of guilty hands. It was reverent. It was real. Amelia bowed once, a gesture of quiet gratitude, and left the stage, not through the staff corridor where she had entered, but down the grand staircase reserved for the stars. The marble beneath her feet no longer felt cold. It felt earned. The morning after the gala, the Royal Conservatory was a different world. Gone was the polished veneer of unassailable prestige. In its place, a hum of frantic whispers, hurried footsteps, and the thick metallic scent of reputations bleeding out. Headlines blazed across the digital skyline. Amelia Cross, the virtuoso they mocked. Royal Conservatory's cruel spectacle backfires spectacularly. Sebastian Vaughn crowns a new queen of music. Screens outside coffee shops replayed clips of Amelia's performance on loop, her bowed head and soaring notes stitching themselves into the fabric of public consciousness. At the center of the maelstrom stood Evelyn Drake. She strode into her office, designer heels clicking against the marble. But the usual rustle of deference was missing. Staff members averted their eyes. Whispers followed her like smoke. A manila envelope waited on her mahogany desk, heavy, ominous. Inside, an official letter from the board. Effective immediately, Evelyn Drake was suspended pending a formal review of conduct unbecoming of the conservatory's values. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the letter back into the envelope, her mind whirring. It wasn't just Sebastian Vaughn's condemnation. It was donors pulling pledges, sponsors withdrawing their gilded endorsements. It was the realization that the conservatory needed a scapegoat, and they had found her. Not far down the hall, Ethan Marlowe sat slouched against a locker, his violin case unopened at his side. His name was already trending for all the wrong reasons. Clips of him heckling Amelia, his voice sneering, his smirk cutting, circulated the internet with ferocity. This is what the conservatory nurtures? Entitled Bully Exposed. Cancel Ethan. His scholarship hung by a thread. Invitations to competitions disappeared overnight. A record label that had once courted him now ghosted him with clinical efficiency. 4. The first time Ethan realized that pedigree and practice rooms weren't enough. The world was no longer clapping for polished prodigies with hollow hearts. It was clapping for truth, and he had none to offer. Meanwhile, Amelia sat in the small, sunlit apartment she rented above a bakery 2 streets from the conservatory. The wrinkled linen dress she had worn the night before hung on the back of a chair, still dusted with faint traces of pollen and stage light. She did not bask in her new fame. Instead, she opened the violin case that had been her father's, running her fingers along the worn wood with a tenderness that spoke of wounds both healed and healing. There were invitations now, a flood of them. The Berlin Philharmonic, the Sydney Opera House, Carnegie Hall, each one addressed not to Ms. Cross florist, but to Amelia Cross artist. Yet she hesitated. Amelia had climbed a mountain no one had believed she could ascend. But she hadn't done it for their applause. She had done it because the music inside her refused to be buried any longer. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Sophie Clark, the student who had first spoken for her amid the jeers. Sophie stood holding a bouquet of white calla lilies, her hands shaking slightly. I thought... Sophie swallowed. I thought maybe... you'd like to teach me someday. Amelia's heart tightened, a quiet smile blooming across her face. Not because Sophie had asked, but because she had believed. Come in, Amelia said softly, stepping aside. In that moment, Amelia understood. The true triumph wasn't the thunderous ovation or the glittering offers. It was the quiet ripple she had sent out into the world. A ripple that would grow into a wave neither Evelyn Drake, nor Ethan Marlowe, nor any of the old guards could ever contain again. The winter sun slanted through the windows of the small rehearsal room, casting long shadows across the polished floorboards. Dust motes swirled in the light, dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. Amelia Cross adjusted the sheet music on the stand, her fingers tracing the notes without thought. Across from her, Sophie sat perched on a chair, her violin cradled nervously in her lap. Outside, the world clamored for Amelia. Invitations, endorsements, magazine covers offering titles she had never sought. But inside this modest room, none of that mattered. Here, there was only music, and the fragile, trembling hope in a young girl's eyes. "Relax your wrist," Amelia said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophie nodded, the bow in her hand wobbling before settling. The first hesitant notes of a simple etude filled the "Dordespoimanvrin," but achingly earnest. Amelia smiled, not at the sound, but at the courage it took to create it. Teaching, she realized, was not a lesser path. It was a deeper one. It was giving voice to those who had yet to find their own. Outside the conservatory walls, headlines continued to roar, "Amelia Cross, music's unlikely messiah." From florist to Philharmonic, the story that changed everything. Journalists camped outside her apartment. Talent agents flooded her inbox. Documentary filmmakers begged for exclusive rights. And yet Amelia remained elusive, an enigma wrapped in quiet purpose. She declined most interviews with a simple, polite refusal. She ignored the whirlwind of offers, the glittering contracts, waving promises of luxury and acclaim, not because she disdained success, but because she knew fame was a stage too, and stages were fragile things. Better to build something lasting. Something real. In the evenings, after teaching Sophie and a handful of other eager students who found their way to her tiny studio, Amelia would walk the empty streets of London. The city's winter chill bit through her coat, but she welcomed, a sharp reminder that she was still anchored, still herself. Passing by the towering facade of the Royal Conservatory, she paused. Golden banners still fluttered, desperate to reclaim their lost luster. They had issued a public apology, of course, carefully worded statements about diversity, humility, and commitment to nurturing all talents. But Amelia knew better. True change did not come from press releases. It came from planting seeds. One note, one lesson, one unwavering act of kindness at a time. And so she dreamed, not of standing ovations, but of something quieter and more enduring. A school. Not like the conservatory with its marble halls and whispered judgments. A place where music was a right, not a privilege. Where no child would ever be laughed at for the clothes they wore, the accent they spoke with, or the hands they brought trembling to the strings. The Hartwood School of Music. That was the name that bloomed in her mind, soft but certain. A sanctuary. Built not on polished surfaces but on the raw, imperfect beauty of real dreams. As the weeks unfurled, whispers of her project began to spread. Sebastian Vaughn, true to his word, offered his silent support. No grand gestures, no spotlights, just quiet funding, connections, and trust. Reporters who tried to corner her for quotes found only locked doors and polite refusals. And gradually, the world shifted, from fascination with the spectacle of her rise to a deeper respect for the revolution she had chosen to spark. One evening, as she closed the studio, Amelia found a note slipped under her door. It was written in careful, trembling script. "Miss Cross, I don't have a violin yet, but if you teach me, I'll find one. Thank you for making a place where people like me can dream. No signature, no address, just hope." Amelia folded the note carefully, placing it into the worn violin case beside her father's instrument. She touched the wood once, tenderly. Not for luck, for gratitude. The world had tried to shove her into a corner, to shrink her into a caricature. She had answered not with rage nor with spectacle, but with music. And now she would answer again, not with headlines, but with an open door and 1,000 songs yet to be sung. The building didn't look like much, a squat 2-story structure. On the edge of East London, its brick walls weathered by years of rain and neglect. The front steps sagged slightly. The windows were cracked in places, patched with careful hands but never quite restored. To anyone else, it was just another forgotten relic in a city that never stopped moving forward. To Amelia Cross, it was a beginning. The Hartwood School of Music, not a palace of polished marble and gold leaf, but a home built from the raw, stubborn hope she carried like a fire inside her. She ran her fingers along the old oak door, the wood cool and rough beneath her touch. The scent of dust and faint lilac drifted out as she pushed it open, revealing a lobby stripped bare of pretense. Mismatched chairs, peeling paint, the faint hum of life waiting to begin. Sebastian Vaughn stood inside, arms crossed, a rare smile, playing at the corner of his mouth. "It's not the Royal Conservatory," he said, voice dry. Amelia smiled back, soft but unwavering. "No," she said. "It's better." Over the past few months, word of Hartwood had spread. Not through press releases or glamorous galas, but through whispers, through quiet acts of trust. Single mothers, foster kids, runaways with music stitched into their bones but no place to belong. They found their way here. There were no auditions, no gilded invitations, only a simple question. Do you want to play? If the answer was yes, the door stayed open. Amelia set up folding chairs in the main room, the faint echo of her footsteps. A reminder that beginnings were often quiet things. Second-hand violins, battered cellos, pianos with keys chipped like old teeth. Each instrument held stories within their worn frames, waiting to be given voice again. It was enough. It had to be. The grand opening was scheduled for that afternoon. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no reporters flashing bulbs, just a gathering of those who believed, some with hope, some with skepticism, some with the brittle fear that good things never lasted. As the clock ticked toward noon, students trickled. In Sophie arrived first, clutching her violin case to her chest like a lifeline. Behind her, a boy with frayed sneakers and a trumpet missing 2 valves shuffled uncertainly through the door. Others followed, a girl with a backpack full of sheet music scribbled by hand. A teenager whose cello was held together with duct tape and fierce pride. Amelia greeted each of them the same way, with a nod, a smile, and a quiet, "Welcome home." Sebastian watched from the doorway, silent. He had seen fortunes built and fall, seen artists rise and crumble. But what unfolded before him now was rarer than any empire. It was belief, made tangible. Amelia stepped into the center of the makeshift hall, raising her hand slightly. The chatter stilled. No podium, no speeches, only her voice clear and steady. "Don't care how much you know," she said, scanning their faces, "or how little you have. I care that when you pick up your instrument," she continued, "you tell the truth." The students listened, some fidgeting, some holding their breath, but in their eyes bloomed the beginning of something sacred. Music not as a competition, not as a currency, but as a language of survival. A battered upright piano sat near the back. Amelia crossed to it, running her fingers over its chipped ivory keys. She pressed one down, a note rang out. Imperfect, trembling, beautiful. She smiled. "This," she said, her voice soft but sure, "is enough." Outside the city roared. On, blind, busy, indifferent. Inside Hartwood, a different kind of world began to breathe. Not with the blare of headlines, not with the flash of cameras, but with the quiet, stubborn heartbeat of dreams taking root in broken soil. Dreams that in time would grow strong enough to shake the world. The first recital at Heartwood School was nothing like the glittering showcases Amelia had once polished silverware for. There were no red carpets, no chandeliers, just a cluster of folding chairs, a battered stage made from old gymnasium planks, and a homemade banner taped to the back wall. Heartwood First Recital. Where music begins. The students were nervous, their instruments wobbled in trembling hands. Their sheet music was crinkled, corners dog-eared from too many late nights practicing under second-hand lamps. Amelia sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding harder than when she had faced the conservatory's hostile gaze. This mattered more. One by one, the students took the stage. Sophie's bow scratched the strings at first, but she pressed on, her sound growing steadier, more certain. The boy with the battered trumpet missed his first note, flushed bright red, then found the next one and refused to let go. The audience, made up of parents, social workers, a few curious neighbors, listened not with the hungry expectation of critics, but with the raw, aching pride of people who knew what it cost to stand and try. Amelia's throat tightened more with each performance. When the last chord rang out, imperfect, glorious, the applause that filled the room wasn't polite. It was a roar of hands and hearts slamming together, willing these young musicians to believe, you belong here. Afterward, the students clustered around Amelia, faces flushed with triumph and disbelief. You were amazing, she told them. No exaggeration needed. Their grins stretched wider than any stage could hold. But outside the fragile walls of Heartwood, a different current swirled. The old world was watching, some with curiosity, some with suspicion, and some with malice. A review appeared the next day in a prestigious classical music journal, penned by a critic who hadn't even attended the recital. Heartwood School's Amateur Hour. A naive project better left to charities, not music education. Anonymous comments flooded the article. Teaching street kids music? A waste. Real talent doesn't come from broken homes. Sad attempt. To make a janitor into a maestro. Amelia read the words once, then closed her laptop. She had weathered worse. But this wasn't just about her anymore. Now there were young hearts tethered to her own. Fragile things, easily bruised. When she arrived at the studio that afternoon, she found Sophie sitting on the steps, knees hugged to her chest, face pale. They said, Sophie's voice cracked. They said we're a joke. Amelia knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's damp cheek. They're wrong, she said quietly. But what if they're not good enough? Sophie's question wasn't selfish. It was the question of every child who had ever been handed the world's contempt instead of its encouragement. Amelia squeezed her hand gently. Listen to me, she said. You're not here to be good enough for them. You're here to be true enough for yourself. Sophie blinked, the tears still clinging to her lashes, but a spark flickered behind them. Fragile, but real. Inside, the other students huddled near the practice rooms, murmuring anxiously. Some had already seen the article, some hadn't, but felt the tremors. Amelia rose, her voice steady as she addressed them. This is what happens when you shine light into places that forgot how to see, she said. They'll try to blind you. They'll try to snuff you out. But remember, their blindness is not your burden. The room fell silent, not with fear, but with something harder, sharper. Resolve. They picked up their battered instruments, their crinkled sheet music, their broken dreams reforged into something unbreakable. They played that afternoon, not for fame, not for approval, but because the music inside them demanded to be heard. Outside, the world sneered. Inside Heartwood, the roots grew deeper, and Amelia knew storms would come, but Heartwood would stand. The second winter of Heartwood arrived quietly, slipping into London like a secret. Frost veined the windows of the Ide, little music school. The battered instruments had been polished by countless earnest hands. The cracked chairs bore the weight of dreams heavier than gold. Inside, the first true concert of Heartwood was about to begin. There was no velvet rope at the door, no dress code demanding silk and diamonds. Just an open invitation printed on plain cardstock. Heartwood School of Music presents A Night of First Songs. Sebastian Vaughn stood near the back, arms folded, a rare flicker of emotion softening his steel gaze. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here because he knew real revolutions begin where no one is looking. The room filled slowly at first. Parents, neighbors, friends who had heard whispers of something different stirring east of the river. Then came others, a reporter from the Times, notebook tucked carefully away, a violinist from the London Symphony, curious despite herself, even a few wary donors who remembered Amelia's name from a year ago, drawn not by scandal, but by something rarer. Hope. Amelia moved among the students, adjusting a music stand here, straightening a bow there. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. No stage makeup, no fanfare, just herself. And that was enough. The lights dimmed. The room hushed, not with anticipation, but with reverence. First came Sophie, her small frame nearly swallowed by the stage. But her violin sang with a confidence carved from every note she had dared to play when the world had told her not to. Then the boy with the battered trumpet. Then the girl with the scribbled sheet music. Each performance was raw, unpolished, perfect. By the final piece, a quartet stitched together from 4 students who had once been too shy to look up from their shoes, the audience was no longer an audience. They were believers. When the last note faded, there was a beat of silence so profound it seemed the very walls were holding their breath. And then, applause. Real. Thunderous. Alive. Tears streaked down faces too proud to hide them. Parents clutched each other, shoulders shaking. Amelia stayed. Near the side, her hands clasped, her heart thundering in her chest. She hadn't played a single note tonight. She hadn't needed to. This chorus of trembling, triumphant hearts was her masterpiece. Later, as the students laughed and hugged, as instruments were packed into cases now a little less battered, a reporter approached her. "Miss Cross," he said, his voice cautious, almost awed. "Can you tell us what your dream is for Heartwood?" Amelia smiled, a small, steady smile that carried all the storms she had weathered, all the hopes she had tended like fragile seeds. She looked around at her students, their shy grins, their calloused fingers, their shining eyes. And then, she said simply, "I don't want to build stars. I want to build constellations." The reporter blinked, his pen faltering for a moment. Amelia continued, her voice quiet but unshakable. "One light alone flickers easily," she said, "but together, they hold the sky." Sebastian Vaughn, standing nearby, smiled to himself. The rare, genuine smile of a man who knew he had placed his bet on something real. That night, no trending hashtags blazed across the internet. No viral videos stormed the news feeds. But somewhere in homes filled with second-hand dreams and trembling hopes, A new sound began to rise, the sound of children picking up battered instruments and daring, for the first time, to play. Not for approval. Not for permission, but because someone had shown them they could. And in that quiet, stubborn revolution, Amelia Cross had done something even greater than reclaim her own stage. She had given it away, and the music, pure, defiant, beautiful, would carry long after the last applause faded, into the night, into the world, into forever. Sometimes the most extraordinary revolutions don't begin with a roar. They begin with a whisper, a single voice daring to be heard in a world that tried to silence it. If Amelia's journey touched something in you, a dream forgotten, a hope you're ready to reclaim, then don't let it end here. Share your thoughts below. Tell us what music still lives inside you, waiting to be heard, and if you believe that even the quietest dream deserves a stage. Subscribe, stay with us, and let's build a constellation together.